The night of March 18, 2002, in the small coastal town of Warwick, Rhode Island, carried a biting chill. The streets were quiet, the salt from the nearby harbor hanging heavy in the air. At 7:42 p.m., 19-year-old Lauren Mitchell stepped out of her part-time shift at Baxter's Books, clutching a canvas tote filled with newly purchased novels. She had planned to walk home along the familiar route through Ocean Avenue, a path she had taken hundreds of times since she'd started college at the University of Rhode Island. It should have been a routine walk, a brief pause between work and her evening study session, but Lauren never reached her front door. Neighbors reported seeing a dark sedan slowly move along the street, its headlights cutting through the foggy night. No one noticed the driver, no one spoke a word, and by the time Lauren's mother, Ellen Mitchell, returned home from her own late shift, her daughter was gone. For 21 years that night remained frozen, a wound in the heart of Warwick that refused to heal. Lauren's disappearance sparked an immediate search. Local police organized patrols, neighbors joined in, and flyers went up on every telephone pole. The town's small size meant everyone knew everyone, and suspicion spread like wildfire. Yet despite hundreds of tips, interviews, and hours combing the foggy coastal streets, no lead held. No arrest was made. Lauren Mitchell was a young woman defined by her curiosity and passion. She stood 5'7", with chestnut hair often tucked into a messy bun, and eyes that seemed to notice details most people overlooked. Her friends described her as thoughtful, brave, and endlessly kind. At the university, she studied marine biology, dreaming of a future dedicated to ocean conservation. Her bedroom walls were adorned with maps of coastlines, Polaroid snapshots of tide pools, and clippings of rare aquatic species. March 18, 2002, began like any other day for Lauren. Her alarm rang at 6:45 a.m., and she quickly dressed in layers to combat the early spring chill. Breakfast was simple, toast with peanut butter and a banana, before catching the 7:15 a.m. shuttle to the university campus. Her professor, Dr. Helen Kramer, remembered her eagerness to volunteer for a research project, tracking local shellfish populations. Lauren never hesitated to help, Kramer recalled. She had this way of asking questions that made you rethink your assumptions. She was special. After classes, Lauren stopped by Baxter's Books to pick up several novels she had reserved for an assignment. Security footage captured her entering the store at 6:10 p.m., browsing the aisles with the same meticulous care she applied to her studies. She paid for her books at 7:05 p.m., smiling at the cashier, Marcy Thompson, who later described Lauren as polite and cheerful. The camera recorded her leaving the store at 7:12 p.m., the tote of books slung over her shoulder. The walk home should have taken 20 minutes, a well-lit path along Ocean Avenue that skirted small parks and modest homes. But Lauren never arrived. By 8 p.m., her mother had called the police, reporting her missing. Officers combed the area door to door, retracing Lauren's steps. They interviewed witnesses, checked cars parked along the street, and even reviewed surveillance from nearby businesses. One neighbor, Richard Connolly, reported seeing a figure emerge from a dark sedan around 7:20 p.m., but the details were too vague to produce a reliable description. Evidence collected at the time was limited. Lauren's tote was found discarded in a shallow ditch near a side street. The books were strewn, but her wallet, phone, and keys were missing. Investigators noted scuff marks in the mud and partial tire impressions nearby, but the spring rain had already washed away much of what could have been crucial evidence. For decades, the Mitchell family lived with the absence of answers. Ellen Mitchell maintained her daughter's bedroom, keeping her clothes neatly folded and the books she had purchased waiting on the shelf. Every March 18th, she placed fresh flowers on the roadside where Lauren's tote had been found, joined by a small group of friends and neighbors who refused to forget. The case, formally designated Warwick Cold Case Bones 02-137, saw periodic reviews. In 2005, Investigators attempted fiber analysis from Lauren's tote and found traces of an unknown textile, but the technology at the time could not provide conclusive results. In 2010, the police re-examined witness statements, cross-referencing them with missing persons databases and vehicle registrations. But nothing led to an arrest. Throughout these years, one name was never considered a suspect until 2022, when DNA technology finally reached the capability to analyze even the smallest trace of genetic material. A cigarette butt found near Lauren's abandoned tote had been preserved meticulously by the original investigators, a routine step that would prove decisive 2 decades later. The sample, initially overlooked, had been stored in the Warwick Police Department evidence room, frozen in time, waiting for technology to catch up. In early 2022, a federal grant allowed the Rhode Island State Police Cold Case Unit to reopen unsolved cases using advanced DNA sequencing and forensic genealogy. Lieutenant Marcus Green, who led the unit, described the process. "We start by identifying biological material that was collected but untested due to technological limitations. Even a single cell can now reveal a profile that connects to families and ultimately to the individual responsible. This is how we give victims a voice decades after their disappearance. The cigarette butt from Lauren's case was among the first samples selected. Through massively parallel sequencing, the team extracted a complete DNA profile. Unlike conventional methods, this technique could work with degraded or minimal samples, turning what was once useless into a key to unlocking the past. Once the profile was generated, the team employed forensic genetic genealogy, comparing Lauren's unknown suspect's DNA against commercial genealogy databases. This method, controversial yet increasingly accepted, allowed investigators to trace distant relatives, constructing a family tree that could narrow down possible suspects. By the summer of 2022, the unit had identified a potential lead, a man living in southern Rhode Island with no criminal record but with familial connections aligning with the DNA results. Detective Julia Tran, assigned to the case, conducted discreet surveillance and collected additional samples from discarded items without alerting the suspect. 3 weeks later, the laboratory confirmed a 99.9999% probability that the DNA on the cigarette butt matched the suspect. 57-year-old Leonard Leo Hayes, a man who had lived in Warwick for decades, known for his quiet presence and involvement in local community programs. Hayes volunteered at the library, coached Little League, and attended town meetings. The realization that someone so familiar could be responsible for Lauren's disappearance stunned investigators and the community alike. A search warrant was swiftly obtained, and investigators began meticulously combing Hayes's home. Inside, they discovered a series of journals and photographs, some dating back to 2002, containing disturbing accounts and sketches that referenced Lauren and the route she took home. Forensic accounting also revealed unusual transactions on Hayes's credit card during the weeks following Lauren's disappearance, further corroborating his presence in key locations. When confronted with the evidence, Hayes initially denied any wrongdoing, but the genetic evidence, combined with the physical documentation in his home, left him with little room for maneuver. During a second interrogation, he confessed in chilling detail, recounting his encounter with Lauren, the abduction, and the measures he took to conceal his actions. He spoke calmly as though rehearsed, describing events that had remained hidden for 20 years. The arrest sent shockwaves through Warwick. Residents who had seen Hayes at town events, at the library, or coaching Little League were left grappling with disbelief. How could a man they trusted so implicitly harbor such darkness? The local media swarmed, capturing reactions from neighbors, classmates of Lauren, and the broader community. The prevailing sentiment was a mixture of grief, anger, and relief. Grief for what had been lost, anger at the betrayal of trust, and relief that justice had finally intervened. For the Mitchell family, the confirmation of Hayes's guilt was a complex mixture of closure and renewed sorrow. "It doesn't bring her back," Ellen Mitchell said in a statement to the press, tears streaking her face. "But knowing the truth allows us to honor her memory honestly. We can finally say her story mattered and that justice found its way to her." The case, now a landmark in Rhode Island's use of forensic genetic genealogy, prompted law enforcement agencies across New England to revisit cold cases, preserving evidence meticulously and exploring DNA options that had previously been unavailable. Detective Tran noted, "Every unsolved case has a story, a family waiting, and a truth that refuses to remain buried. Science gives us the tools to bring that truth to light, even decades later." As Hayes awaited trial, Warwick began tentative steps toward healing. Memorials were established in Lauren's honor, and community initiatives were launched to support families of missing persons, inspired by the Mitchells' unwavering advocacy. The town collectively recognized the duality of grief and resilience, mourning the past while striving for vigilance and protection in the future. By the time the trial began in March 2023, the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, journals, financial records, and confessions all pointed to Hayes's culpability. The jury deliberated for just 2 days before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Hayes to life imprisonment without parole, ensuring he would never again harm another. For the Mitchells, the verdict was bittersweet. It closed a chapter that had spanned 2 decades, yet the absence of Lauren remained unfillable. They continued to honor her memory, establishing scholarships, organizing community remembrance events, and speaking publicly about the importance of perseverance in seeking justice. Lauren's life, though tragically cut short, had left an indelible mark, a story of curiosity, kindness, and ultimately, the enduring power of truth. The summer of 2022 in Warwick carried a strange mix of heat and tension. The town, usually accustomed to the steady rhythm of coastal life, was suddenly awash with whispers, speculation, and cautious glances toward neighbors. Leonard Hayes, the man who had quietly lived among them for decades, had been identified through DNA as the person responsible for Lauren Mitchell's disappearance. For the Mitchell family, the news was both shocking and surreal. After 20 years of uncertainty, the shadow that had hung over their lives was finally lifting, yet it brought with it a renewed flood of emotions they hadn't fully anticipated. Detective Julia Tran continued to lead the meticulous investigation into Hayes. Each piece of evidence from the original 2002 scene was re-examined under the lens of modern forensic science. The tote, once considered a minor artifact, was analyzed for fibers, fingerprints, and trace DNA, and every item in Hayes's home was catalogued with extreme care. Tran emphasized that the strength of the case didn't rest solely on the genetic evidence. DNA gives us the match, but we need context. We need the story that connects every element, every step Hayes took, every lie he told, every attempt he made to bury the truth, she said. The journals found in Hayes's home were particularly damning. They contained detailed accounts of his movements on March 18, 2002, and in the days that followed. Pages filled with sketches of Ocean Avenue, careful notes on Lauren's routines, and references to discarded personal items provided investigators with a timeline that aligned almost perfectly with witness statements from that night. Hayes had meticulously chronicled his actions, possibly to relive them later, a chilling insight into his mindset. But the breakthrough came from the cigarette butt. This small, unassuming object had been overlooked for years, its potential untapped, until forensic genetic genealogy advanced sufficiently to analyze even degraded DNA. Once Hayes's identity was confirmed, investigators began to map his connections, utilizing public records, online databases, and familial genetic links. It was a painstaking process, but the results were undeniable. Hayes had no prior criminal convictions, but his patterns of movement, combined with his familiarity with the area and Lauren's routines, made him an undeniable suspect. The process of building the case against Hayes required careful strategy. Detective Tran and her team knew the community's reaction would be intense. Hayes had been a figure of trust. He volunteered at libraries, coached children, and had long-standing social ties. Arresting him required careful planning to ensure both the safety of the community and the preservation of the integrity of evidence. Surveillance teams documented his daily routines, observing how he interacted with others, while undercover collection of items for DNA comparison confirmed the profile's match beyond any reasonable doubt. On a damp Wednesday morning in September 2022, the arrest was executed. Hayes was taken into custody without incident, though his calm demeanor unsettled many officers. As he was led from his home, neighbors watched in disbelief, their eyes tracing the man they had known as a friendly presence for years. Some whispered prayers, others murmured questions they had long wanted answered. "It couldn't have been him," one woman said quietly. "He always seemed so kind, so ordinary." The dichotomy between the Hayes they knew and the Hayes they now faced created a ripple of shock throughout the community. Inside the interrogation room, Hayes initially denied any involvement. Detective Tran, experienced in the psychology of suspects, used a patient, methodical approach. She laid out the evidence piece by piece: genetic matches, journals, financial records, and corroborating witness statements. Hours passed as Hayes resisted, shifting uneasily in the chair, speaking in short, guarded sentences. But the pressure of incontrovertible DNA evidence was relentless. Tran described the turning point. When he realized there was no plausible denial, you could see the shift. The mask slipped and he began to speak. Hayes's confession was chilling in its calmness. He admitted to watching Lauren as she left Baxter's books, noting her habitual routes, and then approaching her under the cover of darkness. He described the abduction with unsettling precision, detailing the actions he took to prevent discovery. He spoke of hiding her tote and other belongings, and of how he had monitored the town's reactions in the days following the disappearance. Hayes explained that he had never been caught due to the lack of physical evidence and the limitations of early 2000s forensic methods. Unaware that science had evolved beyond what he could anticipate, the community reaction to the confession was immediate and visceral. Families who had grown up with Lauren's disappearance at the center of local law felt a mixture of fear, relief, and anger. Small meetings were convened at town halls and libraries to discuss the case, reflecting on how someone so close could harbor such darkness. Local media covered every detail, focusing on both the procedural aspects and the emotional impact. Editorials and opinion pieces debated the implications of forensic genetic genealogy, discussing the balance between privacy, justice, and the potential to resolve decades-old mysteries. For the Mitchell family, the confession was both a release and a fresh wound. Ellen Mitchell described the moment she heard Hayes's voice recounting the events. Hearing him speak her name, knowing the truth, was devastating. But it was also relief. After 20 years of uncertainty, we finally knew. We finally had answers. Lauren's father, David Mitchell, echoed the sentiment. It doesn't undo the pain. It doesn't bring her back. But it allows us to stop asking questions that had no answers for so long. During this phase of the investigation, other evidence came to light. Digital records revealed that Hayes had researched marine biology terminology around the time Lauren had been studying, possibly indicating premeditation or a disturbing fixation. Travel receipts showed movements that aligned with Lauren's known routes. Moreover, Hayes had made subtle changes to his vehicle and property in the weeks following March 2002, possibly attempting to eliminate traces of his involvement. These findings, while not central to the DNA match, provided further corroboration and painted a clearer picture of his intentions. The DNA evidence itself, once considered a breakthrough, now became central to the prosecutorial strategy. Forensic analysts detailed how the genetic material on the cigarette butt, combined with samples from items Hayes had touched in his home, left no doubt regarding his identity. The laboratory reports were comprehensive, highlighting chain of custody procedures, contamination controls, and the precision of modern sequencing techniques. Prosecutors emphasized that this evidence had effectively bridged the gap between decades-old uncertainty and contemporary scientific capability. Community outreach became an essential component during this stage. Law enforcement hosted forums to educate residents about the case, the investigative process, and the use of DNA technology. Experts explained that forensic genetic genealogy had revolutionized cold case investigations, allowing families long denied closure to finally receive answers. These sessions served a dual purpose: to demystify the science and to acknowledge the emotional toll on the community. Psychologists working with the Mitchell family provided counseling, helping them process the complex mixture of grief, relief, and lingering trauma. They encouraged maintaining rituals of remembrance, such as the annual gathering at the roadside memorial, while also embracing the closure provided by the confession and upcoming trial. Closure is not a single moment, one counselor explained. It's a process. Understanding the truth allows people to begin healing, even in the midst of continued sorrow. As autumn settled over Warwick, the stage for trial was being set. Prosecutors meticulously prepared their case, incorporating the DNA evidence, journals, financial records, and Hayes's confession. Defense attorneys attempted to challenge the admissibility of forensic genetic genealogy, citing privacy concerns and procedural questions. Yet the overwhelming weight of scientific, physical, and testimonial evidence made a defense based on doubt untenable. Throughout this time, the Mitchells engaged in community advocacy, speaking openly about Lauren's life, the impact of the unresolved case, and the role of persistence and technology in achieving justice. Their public statements emphasized not only the resolution of Lauren's disappearance, but also the importance of maintaining hope and vigilance in unsolved cases. Friends, classmates, and neighbors rallied around them, transforming grief into a proactive commitment to supporting missing persons initiatives. By the time court proceedings began in late 2022, the town was tense yet resolute. Public interest in the trial was intense, with media outlets from across the state covering developments, broadcasting statements from legal teams, and highlighting the societal implications of forensic breakthroughs. The courtroom itself became a theater of emotion. Family members of Lauren, Hayes' own relatives, law enforcement officials, journalists, and concerned residents filled the seats, all aware that history was unfolding in that small Rhode Island courtroom. Prosecutors presented their case methodically, detailing Hayes' actions on March 18, 2002, and connecting them to physical and digital evidence. Expert witnesses explained the intricacies of forensic genetic genealogy, the preservation of the cigarette butt, and the corroborating material from Hayes' home. The jury, initially skeptical of the complex science, listened intently as analysts illustrated how decades-old DNA evidence could conclusively identify an individual, leaving little room for reasonable doubt. The defense, predictably, attempted to discredit the science and cast aspersions on procedural steps. However, cross-examinations revealed the robustness of the methods, the careful chain of custody, and the reliability of the genetic analysis. The judge, recognizing the unprecedented but legitimate use of the science, allowed full testimony, emphasizing that the jury must weigh both the emotional and factual dimensions carefully. As the trial unfolded, the Mitchell family sat in quiet focus, holding photographs of Lauren, reading letters she had written during college, and silently witnessing the man responsible for their daughter's disappearance being held accountable. The emotional weight in the room was palpable, a mixture of sorrow, tension, and anticipation. Each piece of evidence presented, Each recollection of the night of March 18, 2002, served to bridge the 2 decades of silence with the current moment of reckoning. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as closing arguments concluded. Prosecutors had laid out a meticulous, unbroken chain of evidence: Hayes's confession, the DNA match from the cigarette butt, the corroborating journals, and the digital and physical traces aligning with the timeline of Lauren Mitchell's disappearance. Each element reinforced the narrative that had haunted Warwick for 2 decades, leaving the jury with an undeniable picture of guilt. The defense had attempted to sow doubt, questioning the new forensic methods and emphasizing Hayes's previously clean record, but the weight of genetic evidence, coupled with the detailed confession, left little room for uncertainty. As the jury deliberated, emotions ran high outside the courtroom. Community members gathered in small clusters, some holding candles, others clutching photos of Lauren, all united in the silent hope for justice. The Mitchell family waited, balancing the anticipation of closure with the weight of 2 decades of grief. Ellen Mitchell held her husband's hand tightly, her knuckles white. Claire's memories of her daughter, her laughter, her dreams, her everyday routines, flooded back with vivid intensity. After several hours, the jury returned. The foreperson's voice trembled slightly as the words were spoken. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom, mingled with tears, quiet sobs, and the faint shuffle of relieved movement. Hayes's face remained eerily calm, his eyes flicking briefly toward the Mitchells, who sat frozen, processing the reality that after 20 years, the man responsible for their daughter's disappearance had finally been held accountable. Sentencing was scheduled shortly thereafter. The judge, aware of the gravity of the crime and the decades-long impact on the family and community, imposed the maximum sentence allowable: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, the sentence resonated not just as punishment, but as recognition of the enduring trauma Lauren's disappearance had inflicted. For the Mitchells, it was a bittersweet moment, the tangible resolution they had longed for, but one that came too late to restore the years lost. In the days following the verdict, Warwick began a subtle process of healing. Community leaders organized remembrance events for Lauren, celebrating her life rather than solely mourning her loss. A local scholarship was established in her name, aimed at supporting young women pursuing higher education, a gesture that transformed tragedy into a lasting, positive legacy. The Mitchells participated actively, speaking openly about their experiences, their perseverance, and the critical role of modern forensic science in resolving long unsolved cases. Detective Julia Tran, whose relentless dedication had been instrumental in cracking the case, reflected on the broader implications. She emphasized that cold cases, no matter how old, held the potential for resolution with the right combination of persistence, technology, and meticulous investigative work. "This isn't just about one case," she noted. "It's a message to families and communities that justice, even delayed, is achievable. We owe it to the victims and their loved ones to never give up." The forensic breakthroughs used in Lauren's case began influencing other cold case investigations across the state and nation. Departments started revisiting old evidence, particularly items once considered unusable, as advances in genetic genealogy and DNA extraction proved capable of providing conclusive results. Law enforcement agencies collaborated more closely, sharing methods, successes, and lessons learned, fostering an environment in which even the most stubborn cold cases could see resolution. For the Mitchells, the legacy of Lauren's case extended beyond closure. It served as a powerful reminder of resilience, the importance of hope, and the unwavering commitment of those who dedicate their lives to seeking justice. Ellen Mitchell described a profound sense of purpose emerging from the grief. Every day without Lauren was a challenge, but now, knowing the truth, we can honor her memory in meaningful ways. We can ensure her story makes a difference, even if she isn't here to see it. As months passed, Hayes remained in custody, the full weight of legal consequences ensuring he could never harm another person. The community, initially shaken, began to reclaim its sense of normalcy, integrating the lessons learned from the tragedy into a stronger collective vigilance. Public discussions about safety, awareness, and the capabilities of forensic science became more frequent, fostering a culture in which both prevention and resolution were valued. In the quiet moments, however, the Mitchells and the community continued to grapple with the emotional residue left by 2 decades of uncertainty. Anniversaries, holidays, and familiar routines carried subtle reminders of Lauren's absence. Yet the clarity brought by Hayes's arrest and conviction allowed those memories to exist within a framework of truth rather than speculation, granting a profound sense of dignity to Lauren's life and the struggles of those who loved her. By the end of 2023, the Rhode Island case had become emblematic of the transformative power of modern forensic techniques. Documentaries, news features, and academic discussions highlighted the investigation, emphasizing not only the meticulous work of law enforcement, but also the emotional journey of families navigating the long shadows cast by unresolved crimes. The Mitchells' advocacy inspired other families to persist in their search for answers, knowing that even the most entrenched mysteries could yield to diligence, science, and unwavering determination. The arrest and conviction of Leonard Hayes closed a painful chapter in Warwick's history, yet it also opened a pathway toward understanding, reflection, and proactive change. Lauren Mitchell's story, once a source of unanswered questions and silent sorrow, had become a catalyst for justice, awareness, and enduring community resilience. While the wounds of loss would never fully disappear, the resolution provided a foundation upon which healing, remembrance, and meaningful action could flourish, ensuring that her life and the truth of her story would resonate far beyond the shadows of the past.